I used to do lots of things.
I used to do things and I'd say things and Jesus, I was evil. Say things and break things and Jesus, I was evil. I never shook baby.
Sweet.
All right. Here we are. Episode 72?
Yeah.
72.
I thought it was 71.
We haven't published 71 yet.
Oh, yeah,
Joe.
that'll come out tomorrow. Yeah.
Joe.
Gotcha.
Joe
Oh, yeah, I
hasn't
guess you got to
published it.
do some editing.
Joe does all the
yeah.
work. We don't do any editing. There's no editing.
No editing. It's just go. Well, hey, you know what? That is really nice to not have to edit.
I'm just the talent. Joe does all that stuff. So I don't. So anyway, here we are with Alex von Sternberg.
Von Sternberg. Yeah.
Excuse me, Alex von
I
Sternberg.
was going to say, I'm not Dutch. I'm not one of those filthy bastards.
Then wait, what's von? Is that German?
It's German, but it's also
German.
fake because there is no von. Okay, when you say von in German, it denotes royalty. There's a town in Germany called Sternberg. It's this little tiny town in northeastern Germany, right by the Polish border. It's not royalty, and the name comes from a Jewish ancestor who came over from Germany around the time of the unification. And yeah, I don't know why. We don't know why. The family knows that he existed. He had my name, and he decided to change his name when he arrived at Ellis Island to von Sternberg to sound fancy, less Jewish. Who knows?
I mean, yeah, if you get the chance to change your name, mine's go like royalty, right?
Exactly.
Royalty.
Yeah,
My family's my father's mother's side, so their last name had to be changed at Ellis Island. Now it's pronounced Vicendes, but it was pronounced like Fuckchendezi or something.
Oh my god!
So they're like, you can't fuck in your last name, so we have to change that.
I believe that is a German name, Fuchs. I think Fuchs, and I do not envy the kids with those names. I mean, I had a rough time having teachers not know how to say my name when I was growing up, and I got used to it after a while. And then actually, when I became a high schooler, and then especially an adult, everything changed. Like instead of people sort of making fun of my name, it turned into, you have the coolest fucking name ever. And I ended up actually getting a frequent flyer miles card in high school because I went down to Argentina at one point and
visiting some family down there.
Don't. Wrong kind of German. Oh man, believe me, when I was down there, and I would occasionally hear, because they do have a German population. They're not all Nazis, but they do have a German population. And I would hear, like, if I heard someone speaking German, I would be like, is that an old man? Oh no, that is an old man. Okay, gonna start making assumptions about him. But yeah, so I got these freaking flyer miles, and for whatever reason it was a United Mileage Plus was what the card was called. They let you give yourself a title. This is before the whole pronoun thing exploded, and on my Facebook at least, I believe my pronouns are His Majesty or something like that. And but no joke, I was able to get a card that labeled me as a Baron, and then coincidentally I had friends who just started calling me the Baron because of my name, and then I was always able to say, actually, you don't even know the half of it, and I pulled out the card and showed that.
Oh shit.
I wish I still had it, but it's like the lettering faded, so yeah.
Well, on that note, we got past your name. Now let's get into what you do.
Yeah.
So obviously we know you, or I know you from. I think I started following on Facebook first, like a while ago, and then Twitter.
I know what it was that brought my attention to your work, at least, Ben, and that was your article about Kamala Harris. Ben, that was forever ago.
That it?
Really?
Oh my god, I caught so much flack for that.
Really?
Yeah, I got a girl stopped talking to me on Bumble. I remember because she messaged, and so clearly we matched or whatever.
Sure.
We started talking. She said, you could tell she looked me up, and that I guess I recently written that, so that was the first thing that came up.
Yeah.
And she sent it to me saying, "Oh, then you're voting for Trump." I'm like, read the first line of the third paragraph. It says, I'm not voting for Trump. It's so she just saw the first thing and immediately assumed because I'm critical of this party, I'm voting for this party. And
anyway, literally every criticism you could level at Kamala Harris comes from, for lack of a better term, left space. Like every single valid criticism of her is like, I'm not saying a right winger can't make those criticisms. I'm not saying that at all. It would just make them kind of strange as far as like the kind
and
of.
I think that's where I largely was coming from. I don't even remember exactly, but I had people messaging me, like people I'd gone to college with, I'd spoken to in a decade. Like, and I post stuff all the time. I write stuff. I write very eclectically. And this was the one thing that was like, people were like, no, look, like basically it was the, you're wasting your vote argument, you know, we're fighting evil argument. I'm like, I don't buy that shit. Like, I'm sorry. If anything, if I had written that article now, it would have been harder on her. It would have been like, told you so, because she's horrible. And in that, I said, I think Biden will be a good president. And I was wrong. And he's not a good president. I think he sucks. But like, I actually was like, I think Biden will be good, but I'm not voting for XYZ and the rest.
Well, you phrased it in such a way that I honestly, I was quoting you directly a lot of the time to my friends. And this is, again, it's so weird to talk about 2020. It feels like it was just yesterday, but it was 3 years ago. It was a long ass time ago. And I would just say what you said, which is that she treated her law office or the DA office like a sport, which that is
pretty common.
Yeah, I'm sure it's common, but it's just like the optics of that being applied to a vice president. And I know the vice president doesn't really matter all that much, but it's just the optics of it are just heinous in so many ways.
I didn't realize that that's how we first connected, but that's very cool. I didn't know that. So I guess I've been following you since then, and really your podcast and your posts on social media. I'm very interested in history. It's one of my favorite kind of like hobbies and pastimes. And then eventually I sometimes I'm just like, why don't I ask this person to come on the podcast? And I did, and now you're here, and we're going to talk. Oh, and your podcast name is History Impossible.
Yeah, what do you do?
Probably name drop it.
History Impossible.
History Impossible. Yes.
And would you say it's like a style? I mean, you openly talk about your influence from Dan Carlin, right? And it's kind of like that big, like very in depth. I mean, your Black Death podcast or the Plague podcast, and this was the second part. It was over 3 hours.
It was like a pseudo sequel because I did an episode that was literally almost twice as long. Back in 2020, actually, around the time that you and I connected on social media, I did an episode on the Spanish flu and I think this is including ad breaks. It's, I believe, 6 hours and 21 minutes long. I can't honestly say I ever want to do something that long again. And yet I'm currently working on an episode that is part of a series that I let go dormant for a year. And it's already...
Is that the Muslim Nazis?
Oh, yeah, the Muslim Nazis. And
that's so interesting.
I'm not going to pretend it's a subtle title. But it's also not a fake out. I mean, I think that people will have to listen to get into it. And I don't want to go on a tangent about that because then it would just be me talking about that this whole time. But basically, I did an episode on the Spanish flu and how it connected to the German Revolution of 1919 to 1920 and how that in turn laid the seeds for the rise of the Third Reich. You know, it would be reductive to say that the Spanish flu gave us the Nazis, but it would be disingenuous to say that it didn't help. Because people always talk about the First World War for good reason. They should. It was the main factor. Pretty much all the, factors that go into the Spanish flu, or to the rise of the Third Reich have to do with World War I. But I honestly thought that a big blind spot was the Spanish flu. It killed more people than the war. And it ended up affecting things in a much deeper way that nobody really has considered all that much because it's a pandemic and people don't, I talked about this in the, plague one. People don't like talking about pandemics once they're over. It's always kind of a curiosity or a sideshow to a bigger event. So I don't think I said this in the podcast, but I guarantee you that in, we'll say 20 years, 30 years, whatever it is, the history books are going to look back on the early 2020s and it's going to be all about Ukraine. Well, they'll mention COVID. It'll be there, but it will be like a blurb in most textbooks, assuming that history is even taught anymore because it's not too upsetting to people, which that's a whole thing. But but anyway, the Spanish flu episode though was it ended up being, I want to say, one of my most successful episodes, which kind of makes sense. We're in the middle of a pandemic, so I saw that Joe Biden made that announcement, or the administration made the announcement that the COVID emergency, in air quotes, is going to be officially over, also in air quotes, on May 11th. And I was thinking like, okay, well, I do think that COVID is largely an afterthought at this point, but you don't just get to say that it's over. Now, I get it. He was saying that because it's like, okay, we're going to stop giving emergency funding, all these bailout things that have been happening because of COVID. Those are going to end on May 11th. And I was just thinking, okay, so now that I know that, I feel like I should talk about a pandemic again, but this time about how it ended and what that did in the long term. And then that's what got us the Black Death episode I did.
Very cool. So I remember learning about the Black Death as a kid. I think it was 6th grade history. It was like quote unquote world history. A lot of like Europe, Middle East, Asia, not really Asia, but Europe and Middle East, like North Africa, Mediterranean, basically. And I just remember one. I don't know why I have this vivid memory. I'm actually wearing a Ramstein.
Oh, nice. I love
Ramstein. And I say that because on the back there's the tour dates and the cities. And I remember in 6th grade, our teacher brought in a shirt that had the Black Death, like 1348 or whatever it was, and all the cities it hit. Like, make that. I thought that was very cool. And that's always stuck with. I want to find that shirt. That always stuck with me. And,
and if it's not there, I will actually make an effort to design it for my own storefront.
You should do that because that's an awesome shirt. And the Black Death is the most metal of pandemics.
It is.
Yeah, when you described like the symptoms of it, like Ben and I were into body horror movies.
Yeah,
it was actually kind of worse than a lot of stuff that I've seen in horror movies. Like,
how is there not a Black Death movie?
There is. It's called The Black Death, and it stars Sean Bean. It was in 2011, I want to say, and it was kind of a social horror film. I don't recall there being much in the way of stuff in it about the plague. It was more about the social effects of it, I think. Yeah, and also, what's his name? Keep wanting to say Eddie Redmayne. He's in it too. I mean, it's like it's a movie that I think it's on Netflix, and if it's not, you can find it easily enough. And I remember liking it, but I don't really remember it all that well. So take that for what it's worth. But yeah, you're right. There should be more. Well, there should just be more pandemic movies in general. Because I mean, that movie that what's his face? Steven Soderbergh made called Contagion. Do you guys remember that?
I watched that during.
Me too.
2020. I feel like a lot of people did.
It's really good. And actually, as silly as it kind of looks now, Outbreak was pretty good back in the 90s. That was an okay one.
Yeah. I feel like was that the one on the cover had like a girl in a gas mask?
Maybe. It's the one that has Dustin Hoffman and Kevin Spacey, which you just got to chuckle whenever his name comes up now. And
maybe I'm not thinking of the right movie.
I'm trying to think of who else is it. It's like a big star-studded cast, and it like basically posits this idea of I think airborne Ebola or something. Like Ebola turned into the cold, which is kind of scary to be honest.
It's terrifying.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I'm just glad we don't have to worry about the plague anymore. But if it becomes a virus, that would suck.
No, it's horrific. And so what I only learned, I remember listening to last podcast on the left's
they did a pretty good job with that too.
Plague series. And so the plague has recurred. I mean, it still exists in some places today, like in parts of India.
Skid Row. I'm sure Joe remembers that.
That's horrific. Yeah. But I know like the Black Death specifically is really what your focus was on. And that was like 1348.
Yeah, it was roughly speaking. I mean, they've dated it pretty exactly at this point, thanks to genetic analysis. It basically started up in the Tian Shan mountain range at around 1338, I think, and then it really got going into Europe in 1347 or so.
Yeah,
or was it 46? It's fuzzy because the story about them hurling corpses into the city of Kaffa being the cause of the Black Death, that did happen, but I mentioned in the podcast that's not like the only way it got in. It got in all over, but it basically started in like the 1330s and then pretty much peaked and ended in about 1352. And then there was still plague outbreaks everywhere, as you said. And I think it was going on until I want to say the 1800s in India, I think was when there was the last major epidemic. So, and then as soon as we got, antibiotics, we lucked out at that point.
Right. Exactly. It would just keep coming back. So I know even like, I think it was Justinian the Second who or was it the first? Like 538 or like one of like the Byzantine
century.
Empire. Yeah, there's an outbreak in Constantinople in the Byzantine Empire, but the Black Death is the most famous because it was like the most destructive. Some cities lost like 60% of their population.
That was the high end, but there were some small villages and towns that were literally completely emptied.
They're just like cities of the dead. Like everyone was dead.
Yeah,
and I mean, you touch on it's a 3-hour and 15-minute episode, so you touch on so many different parts of it, or detail so many different parts of it. And like to me, what is so and I get it. Like it's not not their fault. But like the abandoning of family members is so got like heart-rending. Like
it's heart-wrenching.
It's crazy that it's just like, oh, this person's showing symptoms, they wake up and everyone's just gone.
And I think I said it in the podcast, I did feel horrible reading about that, but I felt even worse thinking to myself, like, could I honestly say I wouldn't at least be tempted to do the same?
Right.
Oh my God, of course.
It's you just have to be in the same room as someone coughing up their bloody mucus to get infected. And if you know that there is no treatment, I mean, maybe that, like, those people abandoning their families, maybe that is how, this is gonna sound kind of weird, but that's how my brain works. Maybe that's how atheism manifested in the 14th century, because like you really could only pray once you got sick. And in your short story, you have the father praying essentially, and like that. For some reason, that part in your story, which I don't know if you've talked about it to your listeners before, but people should go read Ben's story about this because it's very good. It's very
we'll link it in the description.
It's in the TRM Medium publication. Cool. I don't know if I've talked about it on the show, Joe. I'm not sure, but anyway.
Yeah, no, it's
keep praising it.
And Joe, make sure to mute me here. No, it's but there was something about that just really evoked to me just how tragic the whole situation was to these people, because that was all they could hope for. They just had to hope that God would spare them. And frankly, unless they only had bubonic plague, they were not going to be spared. If you got pneumonic plague or septicemic plague, I believe that's like 90 to 100% fatality rate if it progresses to that. So yeah, again, it's, if you get the antibiotics, you're fine. But also if you don't get them within something like 24 hours, even in 2023, you will die.
So that's and that's another part of the plague. I'm just going to call it the plague, the Black Death. We're talking about the Black Death period, but but the plague, like the onset was so rapid that people were just like showed symptoms and died overnight. Sometimes, sometimes they lingered on. I did hear, and this is what I try and show in my story. What's being attempted is there was I don't know what he was, if he was an emperor or a king, or he was just a nobleman or a priest or someone of some intelligence. He isolated himself after showing symptoms, and he was just lancing the buboes one by one, and he survived. Like he survived it doing that, and that's what I try and show going on in the story. Now he doesn't make it, but
and lancing the buboes, like that was, I think that maybe it was this guy. I didn't even talk about that in my episode, but I think it was the last podcast in the Left series that talked about that. But like I think it was him. I wouldn't be surprised if it was him whose methodology ended up being what led the people, like the plague doctors who you describe in your story, believing that if the buboes burst, that's a good sign. I don't know if that's necessarily true or medically accurate by today's standards, but it shows that, like, as frankly backward a lot of understanding and knowledge was in the 14th century, people did still understand cause and effect, which is, you got to give them credit there, I guess.
And just to paint the picture of this time period, because we're going to get into the culture and art and all of that and how it affected those things too, but like to paint the picture of this time, and I know you referenced The Great Mortality, which is on my list of books to read. I haven't gotten to it, but
you'll go through it probably in a weekend. It's such a good book.
I know you cite it a lot. Last podcast cites it a lot. It sounds fantastic. So so we're dealing with the 14th century. This is not a time yet of high science. There is, as you mentioned, there are more, I think, breakthroughs than people like to give that period credit for. I think everyone thinks it was medieval period was horrible and everyone was backwards, and all of a sudden it's the Enlightenment and the Renaissance. Like, no, it's obviously very gradual, but still, like, superstition was huge. Medicine was at a minimum, like, and you have the most horrific thing that could possibly happening. Like, it wasn't a volcano, it wasn't a hurricane, it wasn't an earthquake, it was just an unexplainable at the time, this like a scourge on the entire population, and people are so confused and so rightfully so terrified that you have all these manifestations of like the flagellants and
they were fun.
The loss in institutions. I think there's a huge parallel between COVID and in that sense, the Black Plague in that sense. And you mentioned the change in art, like the dance macabre, or like what's portrayed in art. So it is. It honestly sounds, and you say it's a cliche to say now, and I know it is, but it was the worst time ever to be alive.
It is. Well, and I think that it's a mistake for people to believe that it wasn't terrible. It is terrible, but you could pin. I mean, based on the research and writing I've been doing on the Muslim Nazis at this point, I'm talking about basically the Holocaust in former Yugoslavia, and I think I'd rather be in Black Death Europe than
really.
There. Yeah, it's. Okay, I don't want to derail this too much, but I'll just say that some of this letter I quoted from to describe what was happening after the Ustasha, basically the Croatian Nazis took over after Hitler partitioned Yugoslavia. It has probably the most depraved, horrible things in it described that I've ever read. I mean, it's Rape of Nanking level bad. And Rape of Nanking is about as bad as it gets. And the Ustasha were just as awful, if not worse. So, yeah, I think in that sense, if I'm forced to choose Zagreb in 1941 or Bristol in 1348, I'm going to go with Bristol, I think.
Oh,
I think I'll take my chances. I'll run out to the countryside. Yeah.
Coming up next, stay tuned. You thought it was bad. It only gets worse.
It only gets worse, and it wasn't that long ago. There's a lot of people still alive who remember it.
I think that's what's relativism exists, and I think that's what makes it so much worse. Is that this was in some of our family members' lifetime,
right? Yeah,
it wasn't 700 years ago or whatever it was. So.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the thing is, the more I learned about the Black Death, the more I thought to myself, I was doing the rest of the experience of, honestly, billions of people around the world who have gone through a plague epidemic or pandemic. And because I didn't even talk about how it affected the Middle East and Central Asia. That was a whole other story. And then that was sort of when I was like, I felt this is how the process works for me. I felt the temptation in my mind. It's like, oh, you should probably do a section on the Middle East. And I was like, no, this is how you ended up doing a 6.5-hour episode last time. Stay focused. It's fine.
Can you give just an abridged, like, was it worse? Was it better?
In terms of numbers, it was similar, but because of how Islam was influencing the area, from what little I read about it, they took a much different approach. There was no flagellants. There was no Muslim version of. Well, the funny thing is,
they're like science.
Sort of. I mean, they were much more scientifically literate than Europe was, but they took a much more fatalistic view, where if you died from the plague, you were blessed. Essentially, you were going to heaven because it was through no fault of your own. And it was similar in that they're focusing on the faith element of it, but they weren't all about cultural punishments. As far as I know, there was no pogroms against Jews in the Middle East back then for the plague. Though it's funny when I say that there were no Muslim flagellants, I know that there is a certain sect of Islam that does involve beating yourself with chains. So
there is. They're a Shia sect. They commemorate. I think I don't know this for certain, but I think they're commemorating the death of Ali, which was the fourth prophet. And they're commemorating his death on the battlefield. I think this is in Iran. I'm not positive, but I am positive it's a Shia sect.
I remember, I learned about that. I think I might even reference that in my first pandemic episode, because I did talk about the flagellants for about 5 seconds in that first pandemic episode I did. They were something special. But anyway, sorry.
Muslims put a spin zone on it. So
exactly. Exactly.
Yeah, I know China was hit hard, but I don't think
that
the
too.
details as much.
And that's a little harder. I mean, you mentioned when you took world history in school, you didn't really learn about Asia all that much, and that's just kind of par for the course in a lot of cases. I mean, I did some episodes some years back about stories that take place in Central, Northern, and East Asia, and funny enough, they did. I mean, they did fine as far as podcasts on history go, but they took a while to gain traction compared to something about World War II or
sure.
Because like there's three topics that will always do well if you're a history content creator: World War II, ancient Rome, and the Civil War, the American Civil War.
Yeah,
and
I call those are like the dad categories.
They're the the ultimate dad.
You go to a bookstore. There's the dad section. It's it's Finding Hitler. It's World War II. It's the Civil War. Throw in some like football legends from the 1950s. Guys who didn't wear a face mask and got yourself a dad book.
I think I'll give Dan Carlin credit that I think he helped repopularize World War I a little bit with his excellent series that he did. Which actually, now that I think about it, that series is almost 10 years old.
I don't know that one. World War I was fucking insane. Like, and I think actually has made some of the best movies. Like 1917, great movie.
All Quiet on the Western Front remake.
All Quiet on the Western Front, I loved. I loved it.
The only movie I liked more than that from last year was Everything Everywhere All at Once, which is one of those rare times where I think everything aligns, critics, audiences, everybody who it's like the Beatles. I feel like that movie is like the Beatles, where if you don't like it, that's fine. But
that was my fourth. That was my number 4. I literally rate movies, so I can think.
I do too.
I
mean, we could digress on this for a
white
minute.
Dudes. That's what we do.
Well, exactly. Millennials specifically.
Mine was Banshees of Inisherin was one.
Oh, man,
All Quiet was 2. But I loved it, and a lot of people didn't. I don't know why. I thought it was so cool how it showed the propaganda and his like physical change, the main character's physical changes from when he's just a recruit to when he's in that final battle. I don't want to get too real either, but World War I is, I think, the most infuriating war.
Oh yeah,
there's an objective.
This sounds so weird to say, but there's I don't know if you guys play games much. I'm kind of a gamer, and one of my favorite games that I played a lot a number of years ago was the World War I game Battlefield 1. And if you play the story mode, which you don't really have to, but I do because I wanted to enjoy the story for as much as I could. And at the very beginning, there's like I don't even think it's a quote. I think it's just like the commentary from the developers. They say the First World War was called the war to end all wars. It ended nothing. And that's just it. It's so stark and pessimistic, and that's why All Quiet on the Western Front is so good, and I think it's also why people didn't like it that much, because it's a miserable fucking movie. So well,
I love it.
And that's why there's not gonna be a Black Death movie, probably, because it's a miserable.
You'll believe like, oh man, like I'm gonna have to go to my office job tomorrow.
Exactly.
That sucks.
Well, and I think I probably oversold the COVID comparisons. I was always worried about that, but I was also like, I can't not talk about it. This is ridiculous. Like,
so let's get into those. Let's talk about those. I have notes here about like its effect on art and culture. I don't think we've seen the effect on art yet.
No, not yet.
Not as direct. I think that will come. Black Death, definitely. I want to talk about that. Then I have the loss of trust in institutions. I think that's the most obvious parallel. And then just like religion then, and then religion now. And I really liked, I want you to detail like how you view religion, quote unquote religion today. And how, and a lot of that is it manifests in many different ways. Like social justice is one I know you bring up. And all these different, it's like all these little religions. And it's probably like, I don't know if you say this, I can't remember, but it's like the most sectarian we've ever been.
I didn't say that, but I probably intimated that or implied that with what I was saying, because it's true. I mean, I referenced a book that you guys should read, add to your big list, your big piles of books on your list. But Tara Isabella Burton's Strange Rites, and it's RITES. I think she called it New Religions for a Godless World. And the book is mostly great. It tackles all of these different things that I did know about like social justice kind of taking on a more spiritual bent within the last like half decade or so, probably a little longer, as well as like a lot of the atavistic kind of, I guess you could call them manosphere kind of gurus out there. Like Jordan Peterson in particular, like took on a very spiritual angle, though his relevance always seems to go up and down. I mean, that's a whole subject in and of itself, but yeah, she talks about all this stuff. And one thing I didn't know, and this is kind of embarrassing to admit, but it's also just so fascinating to me, wellness, capital W wellness. I read in that book, it was like, it's a $1.4 trillion industry or $4.1 trillion industry. And that just blew my mind. I didn't even think about it. And I was like, well, wait, you live in LA. You're used to seeing all this stuff everywhere. A gluten-free sticker is an example of wellness culture. And then I thought about it. And I was like, okay, yeah, I guess if you put all the practices in there, like yoga and so on and so forth, you could turn that into a quasi-religion in a way. So, but anyway, so yeah, that book is a really good book.
I agree. I think a contemporary example everyone says is like CrossFit. CrossFit being like a cult.
Soul Cycle. I mean, come on,
Soul Cycle. Yeah,
that's not pretty
hiding
it. Was Peloton? I mean, I don't even remember. Peloton was like all controversial for like 5 seconds, and that's all I know about it. But was that a cult thing too? I don't even know.
It was definitely of the moment. It was of the COVID moment. But I know that people. I don't want to get too broad, but I think where it used to be, everyone would convene to see their priest, right? Like in the Black Death times, you had your Peloton instructor and they were in your home and you had to have this person's class. And I guess to an extreme that could be kind of looked at as a religion. I wouldn't. I think it's more of places that have kind of like tenets and codes and they start separating their flock from others. The good versus evil is always one. Like that's where our politics has gotten the most religious, like when it's like it used to be Republicans and Democrats. There's like both, it was for nerds, it was for they were kind of similar, kind of different, but in the end, like you could all eat at the dinner table. And now it's no, the other side's evil and wants to ruin this country. And that has never been in modern America, that has never been as distinct.
Yeah, because I mean, there is a mistake I think people make when they talk about how America is so divided right now. I'm not saying that they're wrong. It objectively is. And I would say probably the worst in all of our lifetimes. I think we're all around the same age. But, the late 60s and early 70s, it was even worse in terms of levels of violence. I mean, and do I have to invoke the American Civil War? We don't have, we don't have
modern. Yeah. That's why I said modern. Because I thought Civil War.
Yeah. I was going to say, like, we don't have Marjorie Taylor Greene at like caning AOC until she's almost dead.
I agree with you on that. But the difference was the political violence was much worse in the 70s. But that wasn't one side. Like the Democrats and Republicans were actually very similar. Those were like far left, and then the 90s more far right extremists, where it was the parties were actually very, very similar. Like one of the biggest protests in 1968 in Chicago was against the Democratic National Convention. So now it's though the parties are evil. Well, the Republicans think the Democrats, Republicans.
If people want to like feel, well, it'll probably make us feel old, but I mean, if people want to feel maybe a little bit of, validation in the idea that things really have changed a lot in the last, 20 years or so, 2008 had very much 1968 vibes in that sense. It didn't feel like two parties radicalizing. It felt like there was a radicalization, sort of that was against the establishment itself. It felt consistent. I remember the RNC happened in my city at that time. I was living in Minneapolis. That's where I'm from originally. And St. Paul was where the RNC was. Rage Against the Machine went there. There was a big protest. I had a lot of friends who went. But the DNC happened where I don't remember what city the DNC happened in that year, but that Rage Against the Machine went there. There was a giant protest there. It was a very like, it wasn't as partisan as it is now. And I think we kind of saw that break apart after Occupy. Occupy was sort of the last true populist movement. And then it like, I talked about this in another episode I did recently about stakeholder capitalism, and where I compared modern stakeholder capitalism, which is very superficially quote unquote progressive or left wing. That's always it's but it's very much a performance, I think, on the part of a lot of these companies, like especially banks, like all the ones on Wall Street who like to have pride floats, for example. There's there's a great meme where it's like it says 2011 and it's the Occupy movement, and then it says 2022 or whatever year, and it just shows Goldman Sachs pride float.
Dude, I was watching the Thanksgiving Day parade 2 years ago with my fiance. She's in theater. She loves parades, all that stuff. I'm not even fucking kidding. I thought I was like hallucinating. They had children in the street dancing with blown up credit cards for like American Express. And I'm like, what the fuck happened to the 60s? Like, what happened to our country where it's like we have Amex, we have kids holding giant Amexes, twirling them around like they're those spinners for like a used car dealership or something.
Oh, man.
And I was like, what? I thought there was like a glitch in the system or something. It was fucking insane. I could
normally
not believe what I was seeing.
Dude, I'm a pretty gray-pilled guy on a lot of things. I'd even white-pilled in a lot of ways. But you just black-pilled me there. That just hurt.
I wish it was. I wish I was making that up, but I'm like, oh my god, what am I watching?
And then, like, if you criticize it, they just say, "Oh, but look over here. We support trans rights."
Yeah, intersectional flag. It's like,
right.
We have to diversify our board. How about you just like stop fucking over poor people?
Yeah,
like stop buying up entire neighborhoods in the Sun Belt and evicting everyone and doubling the rent. How about you do that instead of just having like another black guy on the board who's going to fuck me just as hard as the rest of the white guys used to fuck me?
This is always what I say about if you really want to be an anti-racist, don't listen to Ibram X. Kendi. Listen to me, a white guy, Jewish descendant, but still a white guy. Listen to me, and just remember that everyone, regardless of their skin color, is just as capable of being an awful, evil piece of shit as everybody else.
Yes, look at Hillary Clinton.
Yeah, so I mean, I don't even know how we got on that, but that's I tend to be very guilty of sending my interviewers when I would talk to other people off on tangents. I'm sorry.
That's what we do. But we can get back to the Black Death. It sucks and
it's bad. hot take from Ben DeLessio.
It sucks real bad, and it's changing the way people think about. So let's talk about institutions or religion. I mean, the big institution of the day was the Roman Catholic Church.
Well, it was not only just it was a political institution as well as it basically filled all the roles that we've essentially atomized out into different agencies and nonprofits and so on and so forth. And media in a lot of cases. I mean, because people don't really think about this, but when you think about it, the priest was the media. I mean, I guess there was heralds in some places, but I mean, there was you got your news from the preacher at the church on Sunday.
Well, he was one of the only guys who could read.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Because the only thing written down was in Latin.
Yeah,
basically. But yeah, so when that institution gets harmed, all the institutions get harmed. And those guys, like I was very careful to say, look, so many priests died. Like they died disproportionately, especially in England. We have the records to see that. And that's because they did their job. They tended to their flock. And some of them might have gotten a little out of hand, but they're like, you're all sinners. This is why this is happening to you. Because they
cut it out.
Cut it out. Exactly. And then those ones took it to the logical conclusion of becoming flagellants. But a lot of the ones who were just doing their job, they died. Them and nuns, they tended the sick. They all died. And they were good people. But the thing is, survivors are going to notice failure. They don't really care about good intentions anymore at that point. You were supposed to do your job, and all of you died. My brother died. My son died. So why would I trust you when, when clearly you couldn't save them? I couldn't save them when I followed your advice. So what good are you? And but that, of course, there was the ones who cheated people, like William the One-Day Priest, who is probably my favorite tertiary character I've ever covered. He is the biggest scumbag I have ever read about. And I don't think there's any record on what happened to him, like specifically, but it's pretty likely he was hung. And that was one of those moments where I was like, thank God, maybe there is a God. So yeah,
even last podcast talks about that, and they're like pretty anti-religion, and they're like, yeah, but a lot of these guys, like the ones who were doing their jobs and just hold up in some castle or move out to the countryside, like a lot of them did actually tend to their flock, and they perished because of it. But just, you know, I kind of feel bad for them in a way, because unlike the institutions that lost our faith here, like during COVID, like the priests there, they really didn't have any control over any of this. They weren't making people do something that made their lives worse. Like, yeah, they made them feel bad about things, and they were confused. And like we said, it was such a horrific time.
Yeah, I guarantee you many of them probably questioned their faith altogether.
Yeah.
Or maybe it reinforced it. I mean, I have to wonder if the ones who perished, like if they were the ones who probably went down questioning their faith, and the ones who became the flagellants were the ones who just thought, well, this is just proof that God exists and he is very angry. I don't know. I can only speculate in that regard. I think that they should be given more credit as a whole. But again, like my whole thing was about like, whether or not they had the best intentions or not doesn't matter, because they essentially failed at their job. They didn't know what their job was, obviously, because nobody knew. But you know, that lost faith in institutions is lost faith in institutions. It doesn't matter, like, you know, who's at fault or anything. I think that we can probably point to institutions today as being more at fault because we actually have proof of them being deceptive in a lot of cases. So that's they're the William the one day priests, if you will. But they, you know, at the end of the day, I think what we really should just be looking at is, look, the trust in institutions is gone, or dying, maybe, if we want to be charitable. And if we look at what happened with the Black Death, what happened after that, what did that lead to? That, you know, given increases in technology, as in the printing press, that kind of allowed, it was a perfect convergence of technology and social change that led to a complete schism of Europe's faith. And it turned, arguably, I've heard people make the claim that the Reformation paved the way for the Enlightenment, which, as we know, paved the way for America. I'm not going that far, but I'm willing to say that the Black Death paved the way for the Reformation to happen when it did and how it did, at, you know, when you combine it with the technology of the time. And I think that if technology now goes a certain way, or a correct, I say corrected air quotes, way, we could see some kind of schism. What that schism would be, I can't even possibly imagine. And what the technology would be, I can't imagine. Though I suspect it will. I started to suspect this. I think it's going to have something to do with AI. I don't know what it would be.
Just about to say ChatGPT.
Yeah.
Well, I was going to say that reminds me a little bit of if you guys caught the debate, it was the Monk debate with Matt Taibbi and Douglas Murray against.
Yes.
Oh yeah.
That was such a frustrating debate. It made me hate Malcolm Gladwell even more than I
they were. But I thought Taibbi and Douglas Murray kicked ass in that. But Taibbi had a great final point, which was, you know, like you guys in the mainstream media can talk all you want about how great and how accurate you guys think you are, but that doesn't change the fact that the majority of Americans over the last 15 years or whatever have lost faith in you. So it's on. So the onus is on you. The responsibility is on you to win the trust back. And it does kind of remind me where it's you know, you're talking about like kind of how, you know, the loss of faith in institutions as well as rising technology. I think we're seeing a little bit of parallel here, where it's like we lost so much faith in institutions and media over the last few years, and now we're seeing, you know, the media getting atomized into, you know, you got Substack and independent journalists who are rising now too. You know, so I don't know. I that's just one parallel I see. You know, with like the printing press, where it's like, oh, now like knowledge is being democratized.
Well, yeah. Well, I mean, I think the printing press is the internet is the printing press,
right,
whereas the printing of the Bible in, you know, German is, you know, that's the change. And you know, what kicked off what became the Reformation, essentially. And that's what I'm thinking, like, what is the technology analog now? The best thing I can think of is ChatGPT, AI related stuff, the stuff that people were reasonably, I actually thought that this was kind of cool that people were talking about it. They just weren't seriously talking about it, which was deep fakes. Remember those? That feels like a dated reference now, but with AI, deep fakes take on a whole new level of terrifying in a lot of ways.
Right.
And I mean, there was the most lurid story of it was, I believe there was a streamer, I forgot her name, but she got essentially AI'd into pornographic material, which, like, I remember when I heard that, I had a very different reaction than when I heard about the like a nude, like any story about celebrities nudes or sex tapes getting leaked. I'm just kind of like, well, you shouldn't have made the fucking sex tape. It's kind of on you, you know.
Yeah.
But in this case, I'm like, no, this is different. This has a different vibe because you don't even have, you know, any level of responsibility on this when something like that happens to you. And so then I try to expand that into like what that could mean, and I start seeing war and and destruction everywhere, because all you have to do is just make a video of Putin saying, I am launching the nukes today at New York City, and then just, you know, that's a crude interpretation, but I can't unsee something like that, you know.
It is going to get so much scarier because like, did you see the ones that came out of Trump getting arrested?
Yeah, they looked like very good.
They looked amazing.
Yeah.
And he's like fighting the police and resisting arrest in the street. And those look so real.
Yeah.
That's only going to get better. And like, yeah, it's a joke. Like, obviously, we know that's not what happened. Trump's the most photographed person in the world. Like, people know if he's going to be, but like, for average people, this could really affect their lives.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know. I'm a lawyer and I deal with evidence, and like, this could really confuse evidence.
Yeah.
Like,
I need to ask you about that lawyer via AI scandal that happened recently. Do you know what I'm talking about?
I think there've been a couple. Which one?
Well, okay, maybe there's a couple. It was the guy, the British guy who went to, I think, Stanford, and he started a service where he claimed that he was able to void like 18 million parking tickets in London.
Oh,
I'm
I've
blanking
not
on the
heard
name of
that,
it.
but that's amazing. I guess a hero.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, apparently it was all a lot of bullshit. And his like newest, most recent thing was he was saying he was going to basically get someone in front of the Supreme Court to basically defend themselves in terms of something, but wear an earpiece and have an AI basically feed them the argument.
I saw that part. I saw that, and
that violates so many laws already. But it was.
I think someone was going to have just. I thought it was just AI was going to argue a case.
Right. Yeah. Which
I don't think it's there yet. Like, I think it's really impressive. And I think it shocked a lot of people with how advanced it really is already. But it's not at that level where, you know, like, how would AI, I don't know, I'm just kind of thinking out loud. Like,
sure,
would have to study the case and be able to think on its feet like that, like peppered with questions from a bench of 9 judges. Let's say if it's the Supreme Court.
Sure.
I don't know. I don't know. That would be really amazing and scary for my profession.
Well,
but I do see
AI threatens my profession too, man. I mean, it threatens what we're doing right now.
It does. and it does. And I think eventually there will be an entire new market for human-centered work. Like, and I even do this already. Like, before AI even existed, I wouldn't say I'm going to use the term art collector as like an amateur term. Like, I have no like expensive pieces, but I do like to buy original pieces of art. I bought pieces from guests who've come on our show, right? And I like that because I know that person or a human made this. It wasn't a print. And so I was doing that before AI, and I think there's just going to be a secondary market for AI.
I made this
human produced work.
I made this comparison to somebody recently. I think it might have just been my partner, Molly. She and I talk about this stuff a lot. But I was saying that I don't think there's much risk to artists, like what you're saying, human-centered art. I like that term, because there's been no danger to vinyl with the rise of cassette tapes, CDs, and streaming, digital and then streaming. No. In fact, vinyl sales have been going up over the years.
Yeah. There are three of record stores within walking distance of my neighborhood. Like, we just got a new one like a month ago. Like, they just keep popping up. So
and it's like, small business has it, you know, it's tough, but like, people like vinyl, people like, you know, the analog. And I think that that's never going to change. I honestly think that just everything is becoming, this is going to sound kind of weird, but I get the sense that things are becoming more niche and less mass, if that makes sense. Like, you still have mass produced like content out there, like your Marvel films and just your Disney films in general, I should say.
Sure.
But like, people watch YouTube all the time. People look at Instagram Reels and TikTok and all that stuff. People listen to podcasts. It's it's a very diverse market. I remember I was talking to a friend of mine when I first moved to LA. He is part of this pretty successful comedy duo on YouTube, and they've been doing stuff since like 2008. So they were able to capture that corner of the market, like pretty like sketch comedy market on YouTube before it just kind of got oversaturated. And he and I were talking about this, and I just said, look, I think this is just the future now, that we're just going to have smaller bubbles of popular things. And I think it's more personalized in that sense.
Yeah.
Nothing's ever going to like pop off in a giant, everybody knows who Michael Jackson level kind of way. I just don't think it's going to happen anymore, because there's just no reason to when we're so decentralized.
And
yeah, I just found out who Mr. Beast was like 3 months ago or
Right.
something. It was like, oh, he's been popular for years. But I was like, how come he's got billions of followers, but how come I never heard of this guy?
Yeah.
It's just weird to me. Like,
well,
yeah.
And I think that, and I love that this happened. So the accurate criticism, I think, of it was millennials and now it's Gen Z, was we have no attention span, right? And everything is getting shorter and shorter and shorter. And like, that's just not true. Like,
no.
Joe, yes, I'm going to reference Joe Rogan on the podcast. Like,
Sure.
he was told, this will never work. Like these 3-hour-long podcasts. Dan Carlin, right? Like, Alex, your show, like this will never work because of attention spans. Like, that has actually been the exact opposite. And the best example of this was Quibi. Didn't even
I forgot about Quibi.
Yeah. And that was like, oh no, it's gonna be like 10-minute clips you could watch on your subway ride or whatever. It's like that slashed and burned like immediately. That didn't get off the ground really, because like, no, it's not just everything getting shorter, everything getting like digestible in these clips. Like there's part of that with TikTok. That's definitely a thing. And part of it
Vine, if you remember that.
Oh yeah,
I do remember Vine. I loved Vine.
I loved Vine. Yeah,
Vine demographic, but it's a different type of entertainment. I can enjoy Vine, and then I can enjoy The Irishman, which is over 3 hours long. And that's and those are different. I'm looking for something different. Like and I think that shows that like some people, like people said, I think theaters are starting to come back more. Yeah, COVID kneecapped them, but theaters, because it's a different experience to go see West Side Story in a theater than to watch it on your TV screen, or to see 1917 or Dunkirk or whatever it is. So I don't think that stuff's going to go away. Like you have to adapt. But that's any market, even artistic markets.
Well, and that's the thing about Vine that was so fun, is that like it wasn't popular because it was 7 seconds long. It was popular because people were so creative when given that handicap of 7 seconds. And on top of that, no one just watched one Vine and moved on. And I mean, come on, we all did the same thing. We watch compilations on YouTube that are like 50 minutes long.
Vine was such I love Vine, because people who like Vine, I can already like ballpark your age. It's like a subset of millennials at a certain time period. And like even people who aren't, like my fiance is a few years younger than I am. She like doesn't know Vine. It's like not, it wasn't a thing. Yeah, it was like not a thing. So it's like a certain subset of millennials that really loved Vine, and those are my people.
Yeah, man. No, and the humor style is great too. Now, granted, it did give us the Paul brothers, so you know,
give or take, right?
Give or take, yeah. But
I liked their Vines,
and their Vines were good. Yeah.
What's his name? Logan was really. What's the other one? Nick. Jake Paul. Like he totally changed.
Really?
Like I mean, do you remember him in Vine? He was like
not specifically. No, I never.
He was just like kind of a preppy kid, and now he's like tatted boxer with like AK-47s and shit. And he was like totally different.
I mean, you got to see a lot of people grow up on Vine, because a lot of them did. They started when they were in middle school and high school, and then they had to expand. Now, I get why Vine failed. Monetizing 7-second clips is next to impossible. I don't know how you do that. It really was, like, in my opinion, evidence that it sounds so counterintuitive, but it was evidence that the short attention span claims were overblown, because again, it wasn't because they were short that they were successful. They were successful because of how creative they were when they were good, I should say, or funny. I mean, sometimes they're just dumb.
And for books, like, like I feel like a lot of like people who didn't, I don't know when there was this point in time when everyone read. I don't think that existed. I think we have this idea that there's a time where like everyone read, and like I don't think that's true. I think there was a group of guys who never read, and they hunted and they drank and they played cards and they played sports, and there were women who had no interest. There were girls who had no interest in reading, and they did whatever girls are. I have no idea what they did, but a pillow fight and
hopscotch or something,
and dishes or whatever they did. And it's like no one reads anymore. It's like, I don't think that's true. If anything, people like I personally don't use ebook or Kindle or any of that. I'm old school, paperback, hard copy. I will never read a Kindle, but my books are on Kindle. They can reach people, like they can reach ebook, they can reach people all over the world, which I love. And people load that shit up. They load up their Kindles and they read. They read a ton. It's just those are the readers. And so I don't know, like this whole thing, like, oh, kids aren't going to read anymore. Like young adult is a huge market.
I was going to say, I think the numbers don't lie. I mean, to bring up the thing that you guys were talking about in a recent episode, Harry Potter is super popular for a reason. And it wasn't just to millennials. Gen Z loves Harry Potter too. Like, don't let the loud, crazy people on Twitter fool you. Harry Potter is still very successful and popular.
Extremely successful.
And I hate to tell you guys something I just found out today. Maybe you already knew, but it really hurts. They're rebooting the movies.
Yeah,
into a TV series. Yeah,
a decade-long series.
I can't even.
What do you mean a decade-long series?
1 year per book, I guess, or one season per book.
We talk about Harry Potter randomly on the show because it's Harry
just
Potter.
Keeps popping up.
It just pops up, especially with J.K. Rowling.
It's millennial Star Wars, really, is what it is.
Yeah, it is. But I mean, I'm a millennial and I love Star Wars.
Sure, me too.
Like Harry Potter, I appreciate Harry Potter because it got an entire generation more into reading. Like it got more. And what I always say is, look, if they're reading Harry Potter today, maybe they're reading, a book I love or one of my books next. It's just the joy of reading. I think
it's a good gateway drug.
It's a
gateway drug. Yes.
Or Divergent or Hunger Games or whatever.
Yeah, like
Twilight, even
young adult. Twilight.
Yeah.
Young adult is extremely popular. It's I think it was our first episode, Joe. We talked about young adult,
Kosoko Jackson, and the whole.
It's a cesspool. It is a horrible.
I've heard,
at least the online.
Just because I've been reading Kat Rosenfield for a while, and the picture she's painted, she's amazing. But the picture she's painted is
does she write young adult? Does she cover it? I have one of her books.
She covers it. I don't think her. Well, I can't speak to all of her books, but her most recent book, I don't believe, is young adult. I think it's just a mystery thriller or something.
No one will miss her.
Yes, I don't think that's young adult. Yeah,
no, it's not.
Yeah, but she's. I know that she's been on the young adult beat. She's written about it. In fact, I think she wrote the first big sort of like, hey, this is kind of crazy guys expose of the young adult scene. This is like back in like 2017 too. I mean, it was a while ago, and I just there's not very often that an article you read like sticks with you many years later, and that was one of them. And it's weird because I'm a writer too. I probably should have mentioned that at the top. I've actually done a lot of fiction writing myself, and I wouldn't be writing young adult. That's the funny thing, though, is what I'm saying. It's like it does not affect me at all, but if you're a writer, you get that knee-jerk empathy with writers who get subjected to this weird like collectivist mentality, because there's nothing more individualistic than writing a book. The fact that politics gets injected into the business the way it does is just so disturbing.
Right. It's like you don't like your protagonist doesn't have the right skin color.
Right.
It doesn't match your skin color, sort of thing.
Right.
Like, and then there's that. I don't know if it's still around, but it's on Twitter. It's like hashtag own voices, where writers write about characters who have the same.
Oh my god.
It
was like the criticism of publishing for so long was the gatekeeperiness of it. And which I think is accurate. Like I'm an independent writer, but now these are just like new gatekeepers. That all it is. This is like a collective set of.
There's a whole bunch of new ones now too.
It's have different criteria instead of like marketability and structure and plot and character development. It's identity and hashtag own voices.
This is why I love guys like Alex Perez. I don't know if you guys follow him on Twitter. I was going to say he was this like. I believe he went to
He went to Iowa. He went to
Iowa, right?
Writer's workshop.
I took a workshop class there one summer, and I got to say, it was just so cool there. I really get it why it's like so successful, but it also sounds like a complete nightmare to go there. Oh wait, what's that?
That's my
very nice.
I'm a big Iowa fan, actually.
Yeah, I love the campus. It was a great campus, and I had a great time there. But yeah, anyway, he came out of that, and it was very just like hearing him talk about that atmosphere just sounds like such a nightmare. I can't even imagine what it's like to be an up and coming writer right now, like a Zoomer, you know.
Yeah, I mean, it's so. I'm not gonna lie. If I could get into the writers' workshop, I would go. But
I wouldn't say no.
Yeah, I would go. It's one of those things where it's like law schools, med schools, like there's top ones where like people could argue for writers. Like I was writers workshop is not, any writer will tell you it's number
the best
one.
In the world. It literally is.
It's undisputed the number one. Now, best in the world. I mean, I would go strictly for the accolade of it, like strictly to say I went. What I actually learned there, I have no idea. And I'm not going, so it doesn't matter. But actually, there's actually a good episode. Have you ever watched Joe Girls? I
tried it, and you know, probably like a lot of people, I hate to just say it's probably a lot of men. I couldn't stand Lena Dunham's face, so I just was like, not doing that. It was actually not her. That's mean. It wasn't her face. It was her face and her voice. That's what got to me.
She's super annoying. I like Girls, and here's why.
Okay.
Watch it.
I like Girls too.
Watch it. Well, watch it like it's a satire. And I guarantee you'll think it's a good show. And some people say, like, no, this is a satire on this Brooklyn liberal mid 2012s hyper like generation of identity. And like I think it's both. I think it's criticizing it, but also showing the virtues of it. And if you watch, it's actually like a really interesting show in that sense.
Okay.
But in the show, she goes to I think she drops out, but she actually gets in at one point, and she kind of, to her credit, like I remember she kind of like skewers a lot of them for only writing based on like identity stuff. Like some of it, if I remember correctly. But,
well, I mean, it's also like, I mean, this is totally my fault. This is not her or anyone involved in that show's fault, but it's also the way she has conducted herself outside of the show that has like made it harder for me to. But you know, I am a firm believer in you do not have to like the artist to like the art. I mean, I recently, I don't know what the algorithm was doing, probably because I was listening to like somebody do a Bill Cosby impression, but they recommended a clip from Bill Cosby himself. And that still stands as one of the greatest stand-up specials ever done, regardless of what he was doing backstage.
We are big fans of separating the art from the artist on this podcast.
Yeah. Well,
except for you, Ben, when it comes to Stephen King.
Well, Stephen King's an exception, and I've said it many times before. It's because of his bullshit about disinformation, misinformation, that kind of stuff. It's like, dude, when you were used to be a transgressive writer who would write, who would like be protested
about children having a gangbang in a sewer.
Thank you. I said that. Yes, I said that gangbang, like this crazy shit, and you were protesting all this stuff, and now that you have this privilege of your money and your big gates up in Bangor, and now that you've made it, and you're going to sit there and talk about like a government panel deciding what's true and what's, it's like, what happened to you, man?
He's like, literally like cheering something that would be seen as villainous in most of his books.
Yes, exactly. It's like, dude, this would be coming after you 20 years ago, 30 years ago. And I couldn't stomach that anymore. So I did take the one or two books I still had on my list off of it, because rarely I do that for this exact reason. It's like, no, this book interests me. Maybe the writer has irritated me, but him I had to. I'm like, I can't do it, dude. Like the Trump tweets is fine. I don't care. Like all that stuff, whatever. But when you start talking about like the government should decide what's true and what's not, you've lost me.
Well, and that's the thing. I'll do the white pill thing I like to do, especially when talking about this stuff. I can speak for at least, you know, the older liberal progressive people in my life, like my mom, for example, like, and I think maybe she might be an exception because she was a journalist for a long time. So she already has a critical eye of the government, no matter who's in power. But a lot of people, when it was the really cringe fucking video of that creepy lady singing that song about disinformation or misinformation. I don't know. That was like, I thought it was fake. I actually thought it was fake when I first saw it. And then I realized it wasn't. And then I realized the government was trying to sanitize a ministry of truth. Like it just blew my mind. But when that happened, I was expecting there to be a bunch of, well, actually, it's a pretty good idea considering January 6th and all that. But literally most people I knew who voted for Biden, just to, label him that way, were all kind of like, this is not good. This is creepy. This is, you do not want the state telling you what is and isn't true. Maybe if you're German, but not if you're, and not if you're an American. For better or worse, we deserve to be given misinformation at any given time. We do not need to be told what is and isn't true. Right. Especially by the government. I mean, would I like it if people are more accurate and more diligent rather in finding accurate sources instead of going down the path that inevitably always leads them back to the Jews did it? Like instead of, yes, I would like that. But the thing is, that's not for me to decide. Yeah, I mean, and that's actually what's funny is that kind of, you know what? I'm the master of segues. This loops back to the whole failure of institutions thing. And there's a kitty I just noticed.
Yeah.
My cats are.
I saw yours in the background. He just
okay. On me. Yeah, she's sleeping right now. But yeah, but yeah, I think like that when we see the government basically just overtly saying, okay, we need to tell you what is and isn't true. We're going to implement something. And as far as I know, they did it. They walked it back. And I don't think they're still pursuing it, but don't quote me on that. I'm sure they probably are.
The thing is though that they will again. Like,
right, of course. They always
will. I did a solo episode on this back whenever this was happening.
Yeah.
And the government, they love to put out feelers about things all the time. I think this happened, and unfortunately they did do it with the COVID passport. It was like, oh, we're not going to do that, and then there's some pushback, and after so many rounds they actually just did it.
Yeah, under the radar, where they smuggled it in. Yeah, I mean that's the thing that COVID did though, is it did kind of reveal in a lot of ways that the sausage is made for a lot of people, because more people had time to learn about that stuff and see it happen in real time, and that in turn feeds into the distrust of institutions growing.
A lot of libertarians were born.
And a lot of us who skew libertarian are kind of like, welcome, it's good to have you. You finally get it. I don't really identify as a libertarian, but if there was if there was a tribe that I tend to get along with most, it's them. So
I don't have any label, but my most libertarian views were like COVID shit.
Yeah.
Like government telling you what you can and can't do, as in like provide for your family and if you can eat in a restaurant or not. Like it's just insane shit to me. That was my most libertarian.
There was I actually put a clip of the woman and I don't know if this got beyond California news. So Joe, you probably remember what I'm talking about, but the woman who her restaurant was kept closed by Newsom's orders. And then she filmed herself saying, this is a slap in my face. And she panned over and there was a film set right next door that just let people,
No, that was all over the place, man.
It was. Okay,
Rogan was talking about that. I saw that. Yeah, that was everywhere. And
because that was insane when that happened. Yeah. And then I heard people say, well, they're checking and so forth. It's like, well, yeah, because they're Hollywood. They have the money to do that. Like, it's like if you're gonna make a class distinction like writ large like that, you cannot be shocked or upset when people get angry with you, because you did that. You made it apparent that you prioritize one group of people who is objectively way wealthier than everybody else over everybody else. Right, it's a terrible idea to do that. And that
Nancy Pelosi getting her hair done,
right? Yeah, or Gavin Newsom.
They all did. Everyone, San Francisco mayor, London Breed, Cuomo, like they all fucking did, because they're all full of it.
Yeah,
Stacey Abrams.
Yep.
Well, she's not a politician, but she did a lot of that shit.
She's trying.
She's giving the old college try.
She's trying. She can't quite get there.
I'm just as corrupt as you guys. See, let me in.
Yeah. I'm doing everything I can.
Yeah. I mean, and the thing is, I do, as much as I do find like populism to be crude as like a way to do politics and a way to govern, especially because it just never is sustainable. I do think that populism on its rise, which was on its rise really since 2015. Trump's election was a reflection of that. That was actually the very first episode I ever did on my podcast called The Original Donald Trump. And it was all about this guy named Dennis Kearney in the 1870s who was stirring shit up in California, literally talking about building a wall to keep the Chinese out. It was like the rhetoric was almost 1-to-1. It was remarkable. He didn't have as much power as Trump did, but he did get the ear of the president. And arguably his rhetoric helped get the Chinese Exclusion Act passed in 1882. And but anyway, the populism that was on the rise since then was probably not, it wasn't going to go away, and it probably was going to remain useful when COVID hit. And I think that, again, that kind of is what I didn't say this earlier, and I feel like I should probably say that it's very hard for a lot of people, especially more literal minded or skeptical people, to see COVID and see the Black Death and be like, there's no comparison, because the Black Death killed up to 200 million people. COVID killed 6 million, not 6 people. but yeah, it's like, yes, in terms of numbers, yes, it's totally different, but so is technology. So is everything has changed in one way or another, but the disruptions are the same and or very similar. And I think that when you pair all these things together, it creates a perfect soup for something to come. And, you know, with the institutions in question not just being a church anymore, with them actually being the state, you know, anarchists might rejoice, but I'm a 2 cheers for anarchism kind of guy, where I'm just like, look, it's a good idea, but I don't think we can handle that, especially at the scales we're talking here. So we got to be really fucking careful moving forward. We have to really be aware of how these things are going to break down and how it might lead to people welcoming things that they can't take back, like an actual authoritarian dictator, an actual suspension of elections, things like that. Given what everybody wants to do to try to stop Trump from being reelected, which, to be clear, I am not a Trump supporter, but the fact that also is very clearly a politically motivated hit job under the guise of protecting democracy, that is not a good thing to hear your leader say, that we're going to rob someone of the right to run for office because we're protecting democracy. That's some Pinochet shit. That's some Franco shit.
We killed 1 million Iraqis to protect democracy. Like they're so full. They're so full. That's just the most. Now it's like a Democrat. I used to be a Republican saying, and now it's a Democrat saying, and it just makes my eyes roll back. Like I get a headache, my eyes rolling so hard from whenever I hear that shit. Like, oh, we have to keep funding a war in Ukraine to protect democracy. It's like, what the fuck are you talking about? That was a corrupt as shit country before Russia invaded. And anyway, I do want to talk about a little bit of the broad term art during the Black Death. I think we should start with the flagellants, because that to me just sounds like a like Shakespeare in the Park of, of like 1348. Do you want to describe it for people who don't know what that is? Do you want to describe what it is?
Well, it's gross, just to give your listeners fair warning. It's basically, well, if you've seen Passion of the Christ, you've seen what they did to themselves. And Passion of the Christ is one of those movies that, you know, when you reference it, people are going to just remember all the controversy about it, but it still had some of the most memorable violence in it. And what the flagellants, or I always say flagellants, and I realize it sounds like I'm saying flatulence.
Flagellants,
but flagellants just sounds so weird to me. I don't know. I'll just try to say flagellants.
It just sounds like a modern slang of, dude, you're so flagellant, you know?
Yeah, exactly. Sounds like Gen Z would say. Exactly. Flagellant, on God.
Yeah, like how you said that in like a Chicano accent. No writer.
No, so basically these guys were just radicals who, a lot of them were priests, like I think the leaders typically, but it was like anybody could be, any man could do it. But the cutest part that my partner Molly brought up, she just loves this. They had to ask permission from their wives to join the flagellants. They had to be like, honey, can I go? And then if you tried to lie and tell the people like, hey, you know, my wife said it was okay, and she's in the door saying, no, I did it, they're gonna be like, you can't join us.
They were sending them out there. Yeah, spend all the time you want.
Yeah, exactly.
You bastard.
Yeah, no, but it was one of those things where they were these radicals that believed the best way to appease the God who clearly hated everybody because he was killing everybody was to do to themselves what Jesus, his son, endured, which is whip themselves repeatedly, get to the point where they were actually like using hooks and spikes, getting embedded in their own flesh and then ripping it out. I mean, it was very graphic and disgusting in a lot of ways. And it was their way of like I said, getting penance for, you know, the sins that they were experiencing, or that they had committed rather, that had led to their suffering that they were experiencing. And what they did is they roamed from town to town doing this, and it was essentially like Shakespeare in the Park, like you said. It was a show, and and people came out as a curiosity, but then they got involved in it.
Are you kidding?
Also,
I would pay so much money to see this shit happen in person.
Well, I would not want to see it in the 14th century though, because they were plague vectors. They were really bad plague vectors, and it was one of those things. When I was thinking about it, I was like, it's like in the riots of 2020, people were suddenly trying to have us believe that people in large gatherings were no longer dangerous of being plague vectors or COVID vectors. And as it turned out, they weren't, because everybody being outside is not a COVID vector. But that inconsistency there is a whole other can of worms. That's basically my radicalizing moment was that. But
there was a lot of this.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. But anyway, so the flagellants, I'm still having trouble with that. But they would go from town to town doing this, but they would also, pairing it with their performance where they were whipping themselves, they would also, if they came across any Jews, they tended to kill them. Because they always do. Yeah, always do. Though there was a particular case in Frankfurt where the entire Jewish quarter was burned to the ground and everybody was killed. And it usually gets attributed to the flagellants, but it sounds like it was actually a mob whipped up by the local governor or local mayor. Like it was a very Tsarist Russia kind of moment for them, where they just wanted to get rid of the Jews there, because everyone was believing the Jews were causing the plague, despite the fact they were also getting infected. But and also despite the fact that the reason why they were having lower infection rates is because, motherfuckers, you force them all into a ghetto. Of course, they're going to be separate from you. But so it's
and anyway. I also heard that one of them was like they were just smart enough to realize that they should be upstream, where like all the shit is downstream, and they're like, if we just go up there, I think we'll be okay. And they would do that. They would be like, demons.
It's like, what do you know that we don't? Oh, that means they put a package of poison in the river. It's just so but hindsight being 2020, people were scared. They didn't know what was going on. I don't have any sympathy for Jew killers, but I do understand why they got to that point, because things just got so bad. So basically that was the flagellants, and they made a really big cultural impact, mostly in sort of how they I guess you could say they represented the disconnection from the church, the personalization of faith. Like they were the first sort of major representation of that in the post-plague years.
Two references to them. One is contemporary. It's the in Angels and Demons.
Dan Brown. That one.
In the movie, I think it's it's not Da Vinci Code, it's Angels and Demons. Opus Dei is still the sect of Catholicism.
Oh, that's Da Vinci Code.
That's Da Vinci Code
with the monk, the pale, the blonde, not blonde, but the albino monk.
Albino. Oh, that's Da Vinci Code. Okay, Da Vinci Code. Where he like whips himself and he wears the band around his, what's it called?
The cilice.
Oh, that's the band around his thigh.
Yeah, it's like it's basically just sort of like a thing of barbed wire. It's not barbed wire, but it's like that. It's called a cilice, and you can tighten it like a belt, and it digs into your flesh. It's metal. Opus Dei is metal.
They are metal. I think Justice Scalia was Opus Dei, actually.
Wait. Okay, I don't want to tell tales out of school, but is it Mel Gibson's father? Wasn't he Opus Dei or something? Or he was just a radical Catholic of some other kind, maybe. Anyway,
no
they're very radical, though.
But that's one where he never did like the spikes or anything, but it was just the ball or whatever it was. And then I always remember Monty Python and the Holy Grail, where the guys, they would walk and with the with the boards of the book or whatever it was.
I'm trying to remember. It's like Iye su domine.
That's I think that's what we would take on the flagellants.
I believe so.
Very funny.
So how long did that production go for, the flagellants in the park?
The production. It lasted not the whole Black Death, because I think it was like 1348 till about 1350, and then Pope Clement VI was like, okay, we gotta put a stop to this. It's pretty ridiculous.
Calm down,
and the thing is, I mentioned in the episode, there was
get a life, flagellants.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I mentioned this. I didn't
go home to your wives.
Go home, please. No, he was he actually liked the flagellants starting out. He marched with them at one point. I don't know if he did any whipping.
Oh, he was an ally?
Yeah, he was an ally initially, but then because he was a kind of an oddity at the time, he was quite amenable to Jews. He liked the Jews. He considered them to be the precursors of Christians, which that's true. They were, and so he was very woke. For lack of a better term for the time,
not killing Jews.
Yeah, the bar is on. The bar is in the basement.
Very low.
Yeah. But it was also, I do think it was not just. He used that as a very fair justification, and he did believe it. I do think that he sincerely was very much protective of the Jews because he recognized the position they were in. But he was also very aware of how anti-clerical the flagellants were. He knew that they were a challenge to his church's authority, like overtly. They said it in in all their rhetoric. So I think it was like a sort of like win-win for him to put the kibosh on them. And surprisingly, they all just said, okay, fine, and just stopped. It pretty much stopped overnight.
Well, it wasn't like one troop though, right? Weren't they like a
No, there was several. There was I would say hundreds, maybe thousands. I never actually got a firm number on that.
It was all over Europe. It wasn't like one country.
Well, the funny thing is flagellantism, I believe is the term. It started in Italy in the 13th century, well before the Black Death happened. But then it cropped up again in Germany during the Black Death. It was mostly Germany. I think it got to France. The British never took part though. I think they just kind of looked at it and were like, the hell, we're not doing that.
Well, that's right. Yeah, the British did.
Yeah, exactly. They just like, we're gonna drink our tea.
That seems that's a bit much.
It's a bit much. Yeah, it's very British of them to say that's a bit much. But yeah, it was a very continental Europe kind of thing. But then as soon as the Pope said, no, you're not doing that anymore, they just said, okay, fine. And I speculate there's probably plenty of examples. If we could travel back in time to a flagellant's home, we would probably see them doing it in private, like the Opus Dei monk in and I have a cat saying hello to me. Hold on a second. Get out of here. Sorry about that. I think that it became a private thing, but I don't think that was something you were going to pretend didn't happen anymore. They made an impact. We're still talking about them 700 years later. So.
Well, they turned into kink and S&M and stuff. Then, right?
There you go. Yeah. Well, I didn't want to sugarcoat that. There was, I did talk about this a little bit in the show. You can't pretend there wasn't a sexual element to it. There absolutely was. It was very voyeuristic to see something so personal out in public. And I think you're right. It probably did birth S&M. We'll say BDSM altogether, like as we know it today in a lot of ways. It's and then also paired it with some really, I don't know, when you pair something like really personal and sexual with something really religious, it starts to get really messy. So I don't know.
We've seen Hellraiser. Yeah.
Exactly.
That's where the magic happens.
Exactly. Yeah.
Well, also I think of a parallel would be, remember when all those white people were like cleaning the black people's feet?
It happened. There was baptisms at George Floyd Square in Minneapolis, which I should note, just so your listeners, I love telling people this because it always makes people go, what? I grew up 5 blocks away from where George Floyd was killed. What? My mom's house is, my mom still lives over there. So I knew exactly where everything was happening and what was going down. Wow. So when I was following the local news and I was seeing literal photos and video footage of people being baptized there and the washing of the feet and stuff like that. I'll give the credit to the feet washers. Those were all pastors, I think, like white pastors washing black pastors' feet. It was like a church thing. It was like I don't know where it was, but it was an explicitly Christian thing that they were doing. Whereas like the baptism stuff and just the oh my God, I cringe just thinking about it, but the Democrats in Kente cloth kneeling in the rotunda.
Oh, like it's the best. Yeah. It's the greatest thing that's ever happened.
I like cringe humor, but even I have limits.
It's painful, but I love it so much.
I hated that so much. I hated that so much.
It's one of the best, like, I don't know, it's one of the best examples of the performative political performative wing of the like Democratic Party.
It's like, for some reason, I mean, it's cringe to see evangelicals weeping and praying with MAGA hats on for Donald Trump. It's bad, especially when you listen to them make excuses for his like personal life, which is just you would never give that level of charitability.
But I also love, like, I think it's cringe in a funny way when you see all like Jesus putting his shoulder on Trump.
Oh
like,
yeah,
on Trump's shoulder. I just want to. I feel like it's something I'd walk into like a 63-year-old white woman's house in Arkansas, and that would like be above the mantle, and just not ironically. Totally genuinely. And
I think I remember that. Maybe it wasn't that specific one, but I saw something like that, and I think I tweeted something out before I really had any followers. I mean, I'm only really started using Twitter like in the last like couple of years, but I remember I saw that and I like posted a photo, and I think I said something like $20 to the person who writes the first / fiction of Jesus and Trump. Like that would just be man. Disgusting at the same time.
Some of the religious Trump art is also very cringe, but I think more fun.
Because sure. Yeah. It's and also it's like I think when people just get that deadly serious about something objectively secular and try to make it religious, it just comes off as like it's weird. I'm an atheist, but like I see that, and there's just something that makes me want to start twitching when I see that. It just feels sacrilegious in a way.
I mean, it was when Trump got indicted. People were comparing him because I guess MLK was assassinated on the same day that Trump was.
I saw
April 4th or something like that. So people were making comparisons. They're like, first they did it to MLK, now they're doing it to John Jay. I was like, what the hell? These are not the same.
I was like,
I love it.
This is like a moral galaxy away. Like it's not even, we're not even in the same realm anymore.
It all just goes like, it just reminds me of the South Park episode of like Jesus and Santa shooting like M16s, like fighting up. Like that's all we're devolved to.
Well, to be fair, I got to do the history thing and be actually dude bro type, but MLK was kind of a philanderer the same way Trump was, just saying. Obviously, MLK was had a good idea in his head, and Trump doesn't have any ideas. But not too far off in that sense. And let's be real.
Unless that was the context of the tweet, it was like, oh look, see, like they're just rounding up all of our major philanderers.
They're
taking them out.
Oh my god, I love that. That's so great.
I tweeted about that too. I was just aghast. I was like, are you really doing this? Yeah, you're really doing this. Okay, let's make these comparisons then. Go ahead. I mean. Then again, I'm one to talk. I'm comparing COVID to the Black Death. I'm sure people feel the same way.
I think the comparisons more though are how its effect on culture, the relativity of it, and I do think that there are legit comparisons.
Sure,
the advances in technology, the distrust of institutions, the change of art. Like I said at the beginning, I don't think people don't have any stomach for or cannot stomach any sort of like COVID direct art at this point. They're trying to be like some movies and stuff, and they just fall flat. Like no one wants that right now. I don't think it's nearly gonna and there's not going to be like this.
This is so interesting. I was just talking to my partner about this, and she was saying she thinks there's going to be a COVID movie within 10 years. And I said, there might be, but it is going to fail.
Yeah.
Oh, like there was the Judd Apatow one, right? On
there was.
What?
That was one.
Wait, which one? What was this? Was it the Jonah Hill one with like him? No. No. I always just assume Jonah Hill's in everything he makes.
It's a film crew and they get sick and they have to get
like a hotel.
Yeah, like in England or something.
That sounds
it got terrible reviews, and it looked really bad too.
People don't want to see that shit.
It's kind of like those 9/11 movies that came out in 2006. You had the Nicolas Cage World Trade Center Oliver Stone movie, and then you had United 93, which I'll be honest, United 93, I don't really want to watch it again because I was kind of bored, but I remember at the time I was more impressed with that. World Trade Center.
That was Paul Greengrass.
Yeah, he's pretty dope. I like his work for the most part. I've become a latter-day Nicolas Cage fan, so I did watch World Trade Center again, and World Trade Center is about as bad as you would expect. There's just one moment in it where, like, when the tower's coming down and you see it from the perspective of the lobby, it like really punched me in the gut. But then I was kind of like, well, I don't know, maybe that's not a good thing. I don't know. It's like
there was a romantic drama film with Robert Pattinson.
Yes.
The ending. I've only seen the ending just because it looks so bad. But
it's like it ends with it pans out and he's inside the tower.
He's in the World Trade Center, and then I think it just says at the bottom like what day it is or something like that. I'm like, oh Jesus. God, that's how the movie ends. I know they finally make up, but then he gets killed in 9/11. It was
what was the thinking there? And I think that we're probably going to get some COVID stuff like that probably in the future. But
it's going to be terrible.
Yeah, it's going to be terrible.
So what I more mean is that the effect of, like, I think it's going to be a lot of kind of like distrust in institutions, like quote unquote conspiracy things.
Oh, I'm fingers crossed for like a 70s paranoid spy thriller renaissance, like a refresh of that. Like,
I love those movies.
Me too. If we could get like a modern day, I mean, they could just remake it. That's what they do these days. But I'd prefer an original thing. But we can have our own Marathon Man, our own Parallax View. You know, paranoia thrillers are. Yeah, All the President's Men. I mean, yes, we could have. Now, granted, All the President's Men is more real events, so we kind of have these people trying to make those movies, like that Me Too movie about the New York Times that came out last year.
The woman talks, or she talks, or
she speaks. Or I think it's yeah. And
wait, Joe, women talking?
Yeah, that's what it was. No one wants to see that.
It's like I just do the verbal meme. It's like men aren't seeing movies with women at the center, and that's like the movie Women Talking. It's like, well, I mean,
that is based. I gotta say that's based.
Come on, like, not give us a chance.
I mean, it's funny too. Like, I get really tired of hearing people like complain about woke Hollywood. You know, just because it's always the same argument. Not because I disagree with it. It's just like, but the examples that they always give of how like we've always had female like led action films. But they're not wrong though. It's like Sigourney Weaver. No, and I get it. Again, but I think when I think about it, I'm like, okay, here's the main point. We have had female-led action films, mainly starring Sigourney Weaver. But let's just look at Aliens. Aliens wasn't good because it was female-led. It was good because it was just a great fucking movie.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter. Like, if you can do a female-led action film that's just a good movie. James Cameron has proven that multiple times at this point.
Yeah.
And
I use those examples a lot, and
exactly, and they should be used. It's very it's one of those things where I just like when I think about like how Hollywood is trying to change up, they're basically trying to inject DEI into their casting, which you know they've been at that for a while.
Yeah,
but the real reason they're doing it is because of Me Too. They're trying to deflect attention away from it's like what Banks going woke, for example. It's the same thing. It's nothing has changed in Hollywood, and nothing ever will change because it's been like this since the beginning.
It's funny. We just talked about this on our latest episode with Anita Sarkeesian, and she's complaining about how
she's
DEI.
back?
Yeah, she keeps like she pops up every once in a while, but she was complaining at some like gaming conference about how these DEI initiatives are working too well. And how like it's like they're spreading very quickly, which is great, but at the same time, it's mostly white men, powerful white men who are running these initiatives, and they're mostly using them as cover. And it's like
we do, baby.
You brought this about, like
you did this to yourself, lady. I mean, don't complain when you realize what it actually means. On top of that, if you want to talk about the efficacy of DEI, pretty much all studies out there show it doesn't work, and in fact, it makes things
it doesn't
worse.
work, and at worst, they make things worse.
Exactly. They make people distrust their colleagues of different races. It's like it really is like this bizarre, like it's a continuation. Okay, so this might get a little too into the political philosophy weeds, but it really is just the newest incarnation of what started as Woodrow Wilson era progressivism. It's just the newest version. I actually was trying to map out this thing for something I'm planning on writing at some point soon, that basically when you're looking at something like DEI, you are looking at, here's the edgiest way to put it. You're looking at the 21st century version of eugenics. Now, let me back up before people are like, what?
Nope, that's it.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
And on that episode.
No, but what happened is in the late 19th century, early 20th century, you have the progressive idea, the progressive era, as they call it. And that's where you have people thinking they can engineer nature, hence eugenics. And that just continues as an idea in the background that's applied to all sorts of different ideologies, from communism to Nazism. When it gets applied to Nazism, we see the logical endpoint of what engineering nature actually means to, a madman, essentially, which is, and then at that point, if you considered yourself someone who believed in human progress, you realize that the Nazis kind of ruined your brand. So you have to rebrand. So then you start to see the slow creep of engineering nurture instead. And you cut all the way to the 21st century and you have engineering nurture, and that is DEI. You could say affirmative action to a degree as well, but I think just the point is that you're basically looking at this idea that everything is nurture. If you consider yourself progressive, everything is socialized. Of all people, Ted Kaczynski actually recognized that in the 90s, but I don't think he obviously didn't come to the right conclusion about what to do, but he did like recognize the idea of this obsession with socialization, and it was only going to get worse, and it did only get worse. I mean, he's probably in prison right now, just shaking his head saying, I told you guys, I told you so. And you get to that point where it's like, I don't think we're going to, well, I don't like doomsaying. So I'm not going to suggest anything like this, but so maybe I'm blinded, but I don't think we're going to get to the equivalent, the logical endpoint of engineering nurture, the way the Nazis got to the logical endpoint of engineering nature. But I suppose I should never say never. Just because I can't imagine what that would look like doesn't mean someone won't.
Right.
So, yeah. That was my political philosophy history lesson, I guess, for this one.
Well,
okay, so we're at an hour and a half.
Yeah.
Is that usually how long you guys go?
Yeah, about. Yeah.
Cool.
Sum
that up. You pro eugenics, anti eugenics?
I am. I'm anti-engineering. Basically,
I also engineering. Bridges suck.
Yeah, bridges suck. Yeah. Oh man. And speaking of bridges, that was another Minneapolis moment. I avoided that bridge collapse back in 2008 by only about an hour or so.
Whoa.
So that was fun when that happened. That was.
Does anything good happen in Minneapolis?
Prince.
Music, Prince.
I'm kidding. Actually, so I live my most convenient airport would be the Atlantic City Airport.
Oh yeah,
is about as big as it sounds, and mainly it's flights to different parts of Florida, South Carolina, sometimes up to Boston. But they actually just got, for some reason, I know the reason, but they got a direct flight to Minneapolis because of some cheap airline that's centered there. Yes, that
Sun
one.
Country. Yeah.
So it's like twice a week they have flights direct from AC to Minneapolis. I'm like, I just might do it. Like,
Sun Country, it's funny. I had a really bad experience with them. We're talking about airlines now. This is the best podcast I've been on in a while. Please have me back if you want to talk about airlines sometime. Yeah. But in all seriousness, Sun Country, I had a bad experience with them. I missed a flight. I booked, or no, I don't remember what happened, but I basically booked a flight with them, canceled it, and they didn't refund me, and I had to go through my bank to get that fixed. But I still think of Sun Country as one of my favorite airlines because their seats they have nice leg room, at least in my experience. They serve Minneapolis beer, which is about the best beer you can find. I'm sure people will contest that, but if they still serve Surly Furious on that flight, you should get it. It's very good. If you
like I said, I might just do it because direct flight. It's the most random flight I can think of. AC to Minneapolis, but I think they're trying to casinos and everything. And Midwest
get like
market.
Tourists.
Cheap flights are going to
come. Like a weird I guess Sun Country because it is cheap. Yeah, that's probably why.
You come lose all your money at the casinos here.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, I mean, because like Minneapolis is fun, but I don't know what people would visit there except
Mall of America.
Yeah, Mall of America.
I'm sure it's a cool city.
It's fine. I fell out of love with it after the riots of 2020, to be honest. I mean, I'm no longer as angry as I used to be about it, but it's.
I just remember they burned down a classic sci-fi bookstore, and I was like, "You guys are on my shit now." I was like, "That's it."
And here's the thing: I know exactly which store it was. It was Uncle Hugo's.
Yes, that was it. And I was like, "You
Uncle
guys
Hugo's
beat raceism by burning down a classic local bookstore."
Literally, Uncle Hugo's and Uncle Edgar's. There was two stores next to each other. Uncle Edgar's was the mystery bookstore, and then Uncle Hugo's was the sci-fi one. And, I think actually, to be honest, when that happened, that was when I remember hearing hearing where the rioting was happening, and they said Lake Street, Chicago and Lake, and I was like, oh no, because there's so many things over there. Like my favorite liquor store was over there, Chicago Lake Liquors, and Uncle Edgar's and Uncle Hugo's. And then as soon as I heard that they were destroyed, I just felt something in my brain snap. I was just like, this is not a good movement. Whatever this is, I'm not going to call it BLM. I'm not going to call whatever this is wrong. and it just broke me at that point.
Even if they fixed racism, I don't think it would be worth it. Like, I don't know. I really like local bookstores. So
me too. Yeah. But anyway, we have some pretty good ones in LA, I'll say. So I think we managed to like I've managed.
Man, I didn't take you to the last bookstore, which
that's a great bookstore.
They shot part of Under the Silver Lake there, Ben.
Oh, no kidding!
Yeah,
I still have to watch that movie.
Yeah, he buys. Isn't that where he buys the comic or whatever?
Dude, you would love it though, Ben, because it's in an old bank. It's 2 stories, and they have
I know exactly. I know what it is.
Bank vaults.
Yeah,
and,
it looks cool. Isn't it right near Skid Row though?
Yeah. Or it's in downtown. I don't know how close it is.
It's not that close. Skid Row is closer to Little Tokyo. Last Bookstore is more like, just downtown, but generally downtown. It's not a great area, but it's not Skid Row bad.
Yeah.
There's a great bookstore up in North Hollywood called the Iliad that I can't recommend enough. That was like my bookstore for a while. But
there's one, Ben, I think we might have been to when you were here. It was on Hollywood Boulevard. It was just movie books. It's just like they have screenplays. They're like printed out.
I don't think we went.
Oh, anyway, it's been around for a long time. I know Tarantino used to hang out there, but you know what I'm talking about, Alex? It's on
I think I do.
It's pretty small, but it's just all film and music and television books.
Is it kind of tucked away behind a place, or is that a different one? I think I'm thinking
it
of
might be a different one, but it's right on Hollywood Boulevard. But it's really small, but it's pretty close.
I think I'm going to be. I was telling Jill, I think I'm going to be in LA next year. I don't know for certain. I believe I have a wedding but somewhere in between LA and San Diego.
Yeah,
and okay,
because of
Palm Springs.
Oh, I don't know. No, it's not Palm Springs. I know Palm Springs. It's not that. I
sure.
It. I actually don't know any of the details. I was just told this recently.
Oh, okay.
But
you should come down this weekend. You should come over.
We'll make a trip out
because direct flight.
What we did last time was we did because like most of our guests live in LA, so we did like some live shows in Joe's backyard. I think that'd be really fun.
Hit me up, seriously. I'm down.
Yeah, man.
I mean, and
I mean that's like a year away, but
sure.
I might be there.
Well, how much is a flight I'm trying to remember how much a flight was to the East Coast because like I said, I flew out there.
It totally varies.
Yeah, I mean, you can find a good price every so often, at least. But anyway, that turned into a very weird meandering end.
Our plans. Everyone's listened to our plans. We have a wedding in Petaluma next year or whatever. I don't know.
Talking about Sun Country Air.
Sun Country Air. No free ads. Cut that, Joe. I want Sun Country Air to be our first sponsor. Dude, you want to get to AC from St. Cloud? Fly Sun Country.
St. Cloud. Fun fact about St. Cloud. At one point ranked the most anti-Semitic town in the country. Don't know how they measured that or why, but
because they're all full of flagellants. And Minnesota seems like such docile people. I don't know.
Well, it's
do it up there.
The aggression is just
it's very fire, of course.
The aggression is just very Nordic. It's very passive, very passive aggressive,
and then mix with some Somali and adds
that was seriously Somali and Hmong people. We were kind of like a sanctuary city for refugees, and it's funny. My family's not even from Minnesota. My parents just happened to be living there when they had me. They were from Ohio, and they had been in Kansas before that, and in Seattle before that. So I could have been born anywhere in the country at that point. So Minnesota just happened to be it.
All right. Well, shout out to Minnesota.
Shout out. This episode brought to you by Sun Country.
Where I basically said they suck because they tried to steal my money, but I still like them as an airline.
All right. Sun Country.
All right.
Well, thanks for coming on, man. This was a lot of fun, and we should get you back on soon, man.
Sure. Yeah. Just let me know. Give me like a week ahead in advance, and I'm usually ready and able at that point.
Sounds good. Fight the crits.
Cool.
All right. Bye, everybody.
Yep. See you later, guys.